guys, this is Miss Cagle, and we are getting ready to start Unit 5, which is going to actually cover almost a 4-week time span. So because of that, there are going to be several lecture videos over the next 3 weeks. So this first lecture video is going to focus in ethics in technical writing. And the reason why is because this particular unit, you are going to be writing our major research paper, and that research paper is going to be evaluating a tool or piece of equipment that you find to be important or valid in your work that you're doing now or possible career path in the future. That is going to require you to do research outside of your own personal experience with the piece of equipment. So you're going to have sources that are more than just blogs of people using that piece of equipment. It's going to require technical sources that are important and that are peer-reviewed and that are valid. And you are going to have to take this information and put it in a paper format. And I will be teaching you how to do that in the next lecture video. We are going to be focusing on coming up, the next lecture video is going to be focusing on two things. It's going to be focusing on the project guidelines so you can start your research, and then also focusing on sources and MLA format and how to cite your sources appropriately. Which has a lot to do with ethics and technical writing, because you have to know how to be ethical in the workplace. You have to understand that you, as a person who is doing writing for your job, you are going to be faced with ethical dilemmas, and you need to know how to traverse those. And you also need to understand how to write to where you are as ethical and as credible as possible. So that is what we're going to cover this week. And then next week, we're going to be focusing a little bit more on the paper. So don't stress that we're not starting the paper itself this week. If you want to look ahead, the lecture video will not be available until Tuesday of next week, but you can go ahead and look at the project guidelines and start coming up with your topic and what you think you're wanting to do. So let's move ahead with ethics and technical writing. So first of all, we need to understand that when writers are planning and writing their products, they're going to face ethical dilemmas they must traverse and avoid. So they're going to ask themselves the following questions. What kind of support materials are ethical to use? Are open web sources like Wikipedia just as valid as academic sources? Hint, hint, they're not. So when you're writing your paper for this big report, you're not allowed to use Wikipedia. And I'll mention a little bit of that later. Can email communications be used without permission? That's a no. And how much can a writer adapt to an audience without sacrificing his own views? Because if you are changing your opinions and views to fit who you are reading for, then you are convincing them to believe something that isn't true. So ethics is all about the truth. So here's a disclaimer. Ethical principles provide the basis for when deciding something is ethics. However, ethics is complicated. There are ways to look at ethics that I know this is a blank, but I'm drawing one. There are ways to look at ethics that are different in different situations. How you treat your friends and strangers are two completely different things. You may tell your friend that a haircut looks bad, but you wouldn't do that to a stranger. You may tell your friend that a shirt is too small, but you wouldn't do that to a stranger because it's not ethical. So you need to make sure you understand your audience. And so an example, in a large scale situation, being ethical may actually bring the end to your company. It is unethical not to report financial situations to the public about your company. But if you report those financial situations or you report that there's big problems, you may lose business. So it's a catch-22. But at the end of the day, being ethical and telling the truth is going to go further than keeping things to yourself. And I know that doesn't have a lot to do with writing the paper itself, but I do hope that you're going to be taking more from this class than just how to write a good paper, but also how to be a professional in the career choice that you're choosing. So here's some ethic principles we need to think about. Ethical communication does not involve just telling the truth and providing accurate information, but making sure that you're telling the truth and providing information that a reasonable audience knows the truth. If you know that your audience is normal people, not professionals in your field, but normal people like me. I don't know anything about cars. So if you're writing a paper to me explaining the downfall of your automobile industry and you're using a bunch of jargon that I have no idea what you're saying and it's Greek pretty much to me, then you're not being ethical, because the point is that it is relatable to the audience that you are trying to reach. So if you're trying to reach normal people, you need to make sure that that audience is able to understand what you're trying to say. You always must act to prevent harm. And then you also need to ask yourself, kind of as a guideline, what would happen if your action or non-action becomes public? Will you go to jail? Will you be embarrassed? Will you lose your company? Would it be worse than losing your company if you don't report something? Excuse me, hold on just a second. Sorry about that. So you do want to make sure that you are thinking about that possibility. So we need to make sure that our presentation of information is accurate and it is achievable to all readers. So how a writer presents their information can affect the reader's understanding. The main thing that you want to focus on is that you're not trying to hide crucial information. So we don't want to bury information that's really important in the middle of your paper where someone might get tired and not read it as carefully. But you also don't want to do the opposite by putting a really minor detail as the first bullet on, let's say, a bulleted list of important things. You want to go in order of most importance. So if you put a minor thing at the top, the people may think that, oh, this is the only issue, not that big of a deal. And that's actually kind of the opposite. And in your text, they talk about this, but one of the biggest examples I can think of is when the Challenger exploded back in 1986. There was a lot of information about the O-rings that were faulty in a presentation, basically saying that these O-rings aren't going to be able to survive cold temperatures. And that information was not present readily at the beginning of this presentation. So when the O-rings faltered due to the low temperatures that was taking place when the Challenger exploded, that information wasn't present to the people who were doing the research because it was buried. So that became a really unethical situation. So here's some ethic issues you actually may encounter when in technical writing itself. First of all, your research, you having research that does not support the project idea. If your project idea is about plumbing and you're bringing up other stuff that has nothing to do with what you're trying to show, then you're just adding filler information, and that's not very ethical. Suppressing relevant information, meaning that you are kind of like what happened with the O-ring thing in the Challenger. You're putting important information way far down in the paper when it should be prevalent and at the front. Presenting visual information ethically is really important. If you're going to use visual aids, you need to make sure those visual aids are easy to understand and don't seem skewed in any way so information is not misrepresented. Also, using a limited source information in your research. If you're doing a research paper on something that's incredibly important and you use one source, then you're really limiting yourself to possibilities of other things. So that's why in this particular essay that you're going to have to write for me, you're going to have 3 sources. That way you can make sure that you are using multiple pieces of information to build a general idea of how this tool or piece of equipment works. You need to make sure that you don't have bias in your writing. And if you're not sure what bias is, it's where you are putting too much of your belief in your writing. Granted that for the paper that we are doing, it is a lot about your belief on how this particular tool works. But you need to tell us both sides, how it works well and some of the areas that it can improve. because you can't just say, oh, this is the greatest tool ever, and then I use it and it's kind of crap just because you like it. So you need to make sure you're covering both sides of the story. So those biases may be unconscious or conscious biases. Unconscious bias typically is where you are unaware of the biases that you have, but you're projecting them anyway. And then lastly, you're using open sources like Wikipedia or blogs or things that anyone can make rather than academic sources. Anyone can make a blog saying that a screwdriver is cool. If you go to Google and you type in reviews of Cobalt screwdrivers, you're going to get millions of those. But they may not necessarily be the best thing to use for a paper because they are personal reviews by people who may not be professionals in their field. It could just be me, a mom of two who doesn't really know how to use a screwdriver well, saying, I like this screwdriver because it's blue and because the handle is comfy. You want to make sure that you are using academic sources from people who are professionals and experts in their fields, and reviews on this equipment from people who are in the field for many years and have used products like this for many years and have an actual stake in the product. You are not allowed to use Wikipedia. You are not allowed to use a blog or like a home improvement website. You need to use things like professional reviews, academic reviews. You need to use things like the manual that comes with the equipment, things of that nature. Stay away from Handyman Joe and his ideas on his how he made his deck last summer by himself. Those are the people you want to stay away from because they're not going to be unbiased. So you also need to make sure that you're documenting things ethically. You are using other people's intellectual property. If you are not documenting those sources and showing exactly what you borrowed, both where you used it and in the works cited page, then you are plagiarizing that information. In a video in a couple weeks, probably the last one before you turn your paper in, I am going to tell you guys how to create a works cited page. And I am going to explain to you how to make sure that you are not plagiarizing. But plagiarizing is stealing. And if you do not cite your sources properly, you will get a 0 on the assignment. It is the same thing as you going in someone's shop and stealing their screwdriver. You don't steal intellectual property. You did not come up with the ideas. You did not come up with the opinions. They are not yours. And you have to give credit to those sources. So you do that in two ways. You use an in-text citation, which puts it right with the information. And you also have a works cited page at the end. And then you also must make sure that you're including all pertinent information about the source, where you got it, what journal it comes from, the website that it comes from. If you are suppressing that information and not including all the relevant pieces of information that you need to know about the source, then you're not documenting things ethically. And that's the same thing as lying, basically. So you also need to make sure that you're establishing credibility with yourself as a writer. And you do that by using appropriate professional language, which we've talked about all semester long at this point. You need to make sure you are writing professionally. You need to make sure that you're citing highly respected sources and not blogs and Wikipedia. You're providing reliable evidence from those sources and that you're using sound logic in the way that you're speaking about the tool or whatever that you're talking about. So, to touch on what a credible source is, you need to use sources that are the following. They are scholarly. Now, I know that we're talking about tools here, but tools and the information about them can still be scholarly. They can have reports and journals and professional reviews on how the tool works. You need to make sure it's peer reviewed, meaning that it is created within the community of people that are using it. And that is looked at by experts and verified by experts in that field. You need to make sure that their arguments are based on solid reasoning and evidence. You can't say that this particular mechanic does not like this jack because it's red. That is not solid reasoning and evidence. Now, if it doesn't support the weight of an average car, or it slips off of its jack spots, or it doesn't pump up the car like it's supposed to. I know I'm not using technical terms here, but hello, Mama too. Don't jack up cars. I'm just trying to use tool things because you're writing a paper about tools. If they have logical reasoning on why they didn't like a particular piece of equipment, that's different. But just not liking it because it's the color or the price doesn't necessarily lead you to believe that it's a solid evidence for a credible source. You need to make sure there's an author. Now, whether that author is the company that made the equipment or a person who actually wrote about the equipment, if you have a source that does not have an author, don't use it. And once again, make sure that it's non-biased. To avoid plagiarism, if you quote a text, you need to provide credit of the source fully, both in an in-text citation and a works cited page. If you paraphrase the information, you still need to provide credit. Just because you put it in your own words does not mean that it's not somebody else's ideas. You still have to give those people credit. And then, like I said, give credit where credit is due, making sure that you are focusing very specifically on who wrote it and making sure that they get the credit for that. This is the end of my presentation. I realize I have not given you a secret word, but it was really short, so I did want to make sure you get all the way through it. Our secret word of the week is source. Source. So please make sure that you are putting that in your secret word box so you can get credit for the week. Remember, if you do not do that, you will be counted absent for this lecture. Next week, start looking for around Tuesday my lecture video on going over the project guidelines and also how to create an MLA works cited page. That way you can go ahead and get started looking your sources over and how to find the sources for your paper. If you are interested in going ahead and looking for those, definitely go ahead and look at the project guidelines and get started. Please do not wait until the last minute to do this. There are going to be assignments every single week that will clue you into how to do this project. You're going to have to provide an outline for me, just like you have in the last few papers. You're also going to have to provide me your works cited page ahead of time. That way I know what sources you're using. That shows me that you are working on your paper through the month. But I will not be accepting this paper late because you have a month to write it. But please do not wait until the last minute to do this because it is time consuming. It does have a lot of moving parts and it does require you to really put forth the effort to put out a good piece of quality work. So until then, I will see you next week. Thanks, guys.